Um, Tonight we're gonna talk about dive tables versus dive computers. Um, where they come from, why they are, some of the similarities, some of the differences. Are they important? Are they no longer important? Do we teach them? Do we not teach them? Um, for new divers coming into diving, basic open water students just learning, I thought this would be kind of beneficial for them to know, I guess, where we came from and where we are today, and do some things overlap? So, without further ado, I'm on with Brian Michaud, Greg Levitz, and we're going to be talking about dive tables versus dive computers. So, what are your, Brian? We'll start with you. What are your preferences when it comes to teaching basic open water? Do you still teach tables? Do you teach computer? Do you teach both? What do you teach?
Well, teaching tables is still part of the requirement. So,
Okay.
yeah, we do go over them. However, we mention the old school tables. What we actually teach is the RGBM,
Okay.
which is a much easier table to learn to use. It's very basic. It is a very safe way to dive, as far as, your diver safety. But when we go when we're taking our students out for checkouts, we do require that they all have a computer. We show them how the computer works. We go over the basic idea behind why we're having them use the computer. But we do go over the table as, okay, here's the idea of how this all came to be, and the computer is going to do your calculations for you, so that you don't have to try to figure out what's happening on the fly. But the computer is essentially going to do something similar to a table in keeping you safe.
Okay.
It's kind of how we approach it at the open water level.
Okay. Greg, how about you?
I teach them both. And so I look at the dive tables as the picture or the painting of the dive. So here's your dive, here's your profile, diving to, 40 feet for 25 minutes. I'm going back to the surface. I'm actually drawing it out. It's the picture. It's the whole picture of a typical dive. And so we use that to see if we can do this dive.
One second, just because, yeah, I'm gonna burst the bubble. Greg is a PADI certified instructor, so we'll get him the tables that he's used to. So go ahead, walk me through what you do on this.
Right. So like if I was to teach the dive tables, I would teach it as there's 3 separate dives, 3 separate tables. Table 1 would be where if you look on top, I would say, well, I'm going to do a 35-foot dive. That's where everything is. Whether it's 20 feet or 30 feet, everything starts at 35.
Okay.
I'll scroll to the bottom of that and I'll say, well, the max time you can do is 205, 35 at 205.
Okay.
205 minutes. So that's a lot of bottom time for one dive. I don't think most people can stay there that long. If you think about it, how many hours that is.
You should see Brian breathe. Brian doesn't breathe. Okay.
Well, I would say that on a typical aluminum 80, we can actually figure out really precisely what, if it's a cubic foot a minute at a whatever, we could figure that out. And so I would teach it as, hey, look, we're going to do 2 dives. Your first dive is 35 feet, and we're only going to do it for 35 minutes. So
Okay.
I would scroll down. Good, you have your cursor there.
Yep.
And the next closest one is an F, 36 minutes. That means I'm only there. I can do 36 minutes. I'm an F diver, and then I would scroll across to the F and say, well, I'm going to be on the surface for 1 hour, let's say. And I look for something that is, there it is, 47 minutes to 134. And then I'd scroll down and say, okay, I am now a B diver. So I ended my first dive as an F diver. I'm on the surface for a period of time. I became a B diver. And as a B diver, how much nitrogen do I have in my system? Well, if I was doing another 35-foot dive, I would see that there would be 19 minutes right there, which means I have 19 minutes of residual nitrogen. Of course, that's table 3. I would call it the back is table 3.
Yep.
And if you were to add up the white and the blue, surprisingly, 35 feet, if you add up any one of these columns, 35 and B, 19, can't read the other one. But they 5.
186.
It could be. So that means I could do 186 minutes. So in the next dive.
Okay.
Kind of how I would use the dive tables. But I think when I explain a dive table versus a computer, the dive table plans the dive,
Yep.
the planner, and the computer is your actual dive.
Okay. Let's stop right there, Brian. Real quick, I'm gonna pull. Can you walk us through your? Unfortunately, it's coming out, but Brian's a NAUI certified instructor. This is a NAUI dive table.
Yeah, hang on.
I'm trying to find a copy of the RGBM.
Well, there's
So,
a picture. Okay. Sorry.
Sorry.
well, I would say if you just type in NAUI RGBM and go to images, it'll come right up.
Okay. And here we go. There you go, sir.
Cool. So with the RGBMs, especially with your newer divers, you're not going to be doing 3, 4, 5, 6 dives a day, most likely. You know, most students don't. So the RGBMs are set up basically to show you 3 dives. If you happen to go to dive 4, dive 5, dive 6, you still use in the chart there dive 3. If you notice, the end is, if we stick with, man, it's really small to look at.
Sorry.
That's right.
How's that?
Hey, that's better.
Okay.
So so if you see if for dive 1, which is on the far left,
I just
drop
learned
down.
how to make it bigger, by the way.
What's that?
I said I just learned how to make it bigger.
We'll save the comments.
Yep.
So dive 1, if we go to 30 feet, you can see there that your maximum dive time is going to be 110 minutes
Okay.
at 30 feet.
Yep.
The key, whereas a lot of your other tables, you go in, you come out as a letter, you go back in as a different letter group. The way this one works is you have to have 1 hour in between each dive.
Okay.
It doesn't matter if you have more, but you just have to have 1.
Okay.
So as long as you have 1 hour in between,
Yep.
when you go in for dive 2, which is your second column, you can go to the same depth or a shallower depth. You can't, it will not allow reverse profile.
So am I to understand correctly that if you're on the surface for less than an hour, it's a continuation of the first dive?
No.
Okay.
It's if you do that, you can't use this table.
Okay.
So if you're in the water, you come to the surface for 5 minutes and you drop back down again. That's the same dive.
Right.
If you get out of the water and you're out of the water for 50 minutes, you got to wait 10 more minutes before you get back in the water
To use this table.
to use this table.
Okay.
You have to stay out for 1 hour.
Okay.
So we do our first dive. If you notice, on dive 1, 130 feet gives you 5 minutes. When you go to the next column, the deepest you can go for dive 2 is 80 feet.
Okay.
So any dive that you do for dive 2 needs to be shallower
Yeah.
than your first dive.
Okay.
And you'll notice, let's say you did a 120-foot dive, you were there for 10 minutes, you came out, you decide to go back to 60 feet. Well, at 60 feet, you can stay for 40 minutes.
Yep.
And then you come out and you're out for an hour. Now you notice dive 3, they're all 30-foot depths.
Okay.
And you notice you have 150 minutes for a total runtime.
Why does up here say 5?
I'm going to say that that's possibly a typo.
Okay.
Because,
All the top row says 5.
yeah, on dive 2, 80 feet, you're going to get 5 minutes. Because
Gotcha.
it's dive 2, you got residual nitrogen. Dive 3, you can only go to 30 feet, and you can stay for 150 minutes. Now, like we were just mentioning, who's going to stay for 150 minutes? That's a lot of air out of a tank.
That's you.
Well, yeah, maybe. So an 80 cubic foot, just throw it out there, an 80 cubic foot tank at 30 feet will last me an hour and 40 minutes.
Okay.
Just throw it. That's my air consumption. But anyway, dive 3, dive 4, dive 5, dive 6
Yep.
on the RGBMs. Those dives, 3, 4, 5, and 6, can have a total runtime combined of 150 minutes.
Gotcha.
So that's one of the nice things about it is that it's easy to plan. So if you're diving tables, this one here makes it very simple, and it is very safe. It's the likelihood of running into issues as long as you follow the rules. A minimum 1 hour in between.
Yep.
And you can't go deeper.
Okay. Okay. So, what are some of the drawbacks? We're going to do this for both sets of tables. What are the drawbacks for the NAUI RGBM? Go ahead.
It's because it's so simple.
Yep.
You don't have any leeway.
Okay.
On a regular table, if you had to reverse profile, you could figure out a reverse profile on a regular table.
Yep.
It may start getting a little complicated, but you can do it. NAUI RGBM does not allow it. Can't do it. Doesn't exist. That type of diving never happens. So if dive 1, you went to 30 feet, well, guess where you're staying for all the rest of your dives that day.
Gotcha.
You gotta wait till the next day before you can do anything else.
So let's real quick. I'm gonna show the other NAUI table. Now this looks similar to the PADI tables, and every agency has a set of tables, and they came from somewhere. I mean, that's nitpicking. All that I guess what I want to stress to everyone, all tables come from research, and they come from studies, and agencies and scientists have done these studies, and they've done this research, and they've done laboratory experiments, and this is their best guess. It's an educated guess, it's a research guess, but all tables are best guess. Do we all agree on that?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So following these tables, do we all agree that following tables in general is the safest way to plan and execute a dive?
I would say.
Yeah.
Okay. I just
Yeah. Following the rules, right? These are the rules of your dive.
Yep. Okay. So tables and a stopwatch, best way, safest way to dive. So let's talk about computers. So how do computers do what a dive table does? So we'll start with Greg this time.
Yeah. So if dive tables are the actual dive plan where you're planning it out on the surface of your whole plan, then and then you look at the computer as the actual dive, if a typical dive doesn't say I'm dropping down to 80 feet and staying at 80 feet the whole time. If you're diving a ship, then you might drop down to the sand. You might explore there, but you might also explore up on the bridge, which might be 50 feet difference. So what your computer, the way I look at it, is the computer is basically adjusting for time and depth always. It's always making those changes. Now, Patty, of course, has a multi-level dive table. It's called the wheel. It's, you know, and I don't think a lot of people now even remember how to use it. But it was supposed to, in the beginning, it was supposed to take place of a, do you have a wheel, a Patty wheel?
Patty wheel.
Yeah, look up the Patty wheel.
Dude, I can't Google stuff that fast.
Yeah, I know.
I know spelling's hard.
Whatever. Patty wheel.
Yeah.
Image. Ah, here we go.
Right there. Yeah, I see him. Yeah. I'm not going to explain how to use it because it's a little complicated.
Holy cow.
But what that's doing is it's adjusting for different depths and different levels as you're diving. And typically you're diving your deepest dive first. That's your typical, right? And typically you're diving, even on whatever dive it is, you're diving at your deepest part first. So you're not typically saying, well, I'm going to dive to 50 feet, then go to 100 feet. I would typically say, I'm going to, thank you. I'm going to dive, 100 feet and make my way up shallower.
Okay.
Right?
So how does this relate to a computer?
Well, I think that this was their attempt at allowing you to plan out your dives, your multi-level dives.
Okay.
Like a computer, I mean, I don't have really expensive computers, so it's very hard to plan. If I was to look at I look at my computer, I can scroll through and say, well, fine, max depth at 100 is this, at 90 feet it's this, at 80 feet it's this. But it's not going to plan your dive. So I look at the computer as here's my dive. This is what I'm doing. I'm watching it saying I've got remaining bottom time. RBT will always show up, or RT depending on the computer, or it might be remaining. Whatever. All computers are a little different. So that's kind of how I would look at a computer versus a table.
Okay.
Table runs it. The computer runs the dive.
Hey, Brian, what about you?
So
I just think this is a pretty computer.
Yeah, it's pretty.
That's
yeah.
sexy.
A really sexy one's the Eon Steel. So like Greg was saying, yeah, the computer runs the dive. It does all those computations that you can't do on the fly. Okay, so I only spent 10 minutes at this depth. I then ascended up 15, 20 feet, and I had hung out there for 10 minutes, and then I dropped down another 5 feet for, because most dives have those slight elevations and variations. It's very rare we go to the bottom and just stay on the bottom and then come up. There aren't, certainly not the dives I've been on, there aren't that many that are that kind of a flat profile. So
Todd, pull up a typical dive profile. That's exactly what you're talking about, Brian, right?
Yep.
How about this?
Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, so I can explain this one. This is a Patty one. Well, actually, I don't know. It could be anyone, really.
Yeah.
But actually, it's...
Yeah, but it's Brian's turn.
No, I know that. I'm just saying. Yeah.
In planning, we would use this. Your depth, your bottom time. You come up, you've got your surface interval, then you got your depth, your bottom time. We use a chart like this to do multiple dives during the course of the day.
Okay.
But the picture that was just to the right of that one looked more like an oscilloscope graph, where where you can see the diver went down, came up, down, on their way down. there was little ascensions along the way. Then they got down to whatever their depth was there.
Looks like 10.5 meters.
Yeah, so not a terribly deep dive, but you can see how it's not that smooth digital line. It's very analog. It's up and down. It's kind of all over the place, and the computer makes adjustments for that. It's able to calculate, oh, well, we only were here for a minute and then we came up. So it goes between in-gassing, off-gassing, back and forth, keeping track of basically your nitrogen loading. Where are you really, as opposed to theoretically on a table? Now, again, it's all best guess, like we said, but the computer is taking a best guess that might be this wide and narrowing it down a little bit, in a sense, to try to give you more underwater time.
Okay.
You may not get more time at your deepest depth. 5 minutes at 130 feet is going to be 5 minutes at 130 feet. But now, instead of coming straight to the surface, because, well, I've got my 5 minutes in, it now factors in, well, I'm back up at 30 feet, so I can spend a little bit of time because I'm not in-gassing nitrogen as quickly as I was down at 130.
Now, what Brian's talking about as far as on-gassing and off-gassing nitrogen goes into a whole actual lesson about physics and physiology and how your body reacts. So I want everyone to understand it, but we're not going to get into in-depth. So on-gassing just means your body absorbing nitrogen as you descend. Off-gassing, your body gets rid of nitrogen as you ascend. Sorry, Brian, I just want to interject that.
That's good. I say I'm essentially that's my take on it, that the computer is going to give you credit for your shallower time.
Okay.
And enable you to stay longer.
So
Okay.
the whole goal, the way I look at it also is the computer is designed to give you your max bottom time at any depth. That's the way it's designed. At least my cheap ones are. It will always change because whatever your dive is, right? It always will say remaining bottom time, and you'll see that as you ascend, your remaining bottom time gets longer and longer.
Right.
So let's talk. Well, we can talk about expense real quick. So dive tables. I don't NAUI, TDI, SDI, PADI, whatever. They're generally what, $10 for the tables? Okay. So you can plan it out, you can write it out, and you can dive for $10 and be very happy and be cool. I don't want people thinking they have to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on top of the line computers to be able to do a recreational dive. Okay.
Very true.
So talk to me with your experience, computers that you guys have used. What do you like? What don't you like? Bri, we'll start with you.
I've used a few. I still have an Atmos XT, I think it is. It's a wireless air integrated computer. It's a little bit older, works great. Nice little wrist mounted unit. If you start having a hard time seeing things up close, probably not the best computer to have, because things are a little small.
These are our promotional plugs.
Yeah,
I'm running high test. So, what I'm currently diving is an Eon Steel.
Okay.
Which actually,
what do you like about it?
I love the fact that they're wireless, both of them. I actually never owned one that was not air integrated. So.
Hi, Sophie.
With the air, with the air integration, it it lets you know what you have left in air time.
Okay.
So not only do you have bottom time and what your no decompression limits are, but it also shows you how many minutes of air time you have left based on your current breathing rate and pressure in the tank.
Okay.
So
So your
if,
computer gives you a whole lot of information
yeah,
that's useful during your dive.
yep.
Okay.
If you're feeling a little anxious or you're a little chilly, so you're breathing a little heavier, and maybe you don't realize it because it's only slightly, and you look at your computer and goes, whoa, hey, wait a minute, this says I only have 30 minutes of air left, but my no decompression limit is still 50 minutes. Normally it's the other way around. It kind of will, oh, hey, okay, I'm excited, I'm breathing a lot harder than I normally would be if I was a little bit warmer or whatever. So yeah, it gives you tons of information.
Because new open water divers never get excited.
Nah, not at all.
Greg, how about you?
My first sort of dive computer, because it wasn't really technically a dive computer, 20 24 years ago, was a Citizen Hyper Aqualand.
Oh wow.
It was a watch, and that watch, I still have it. It's unbelievable. You know, it kept track of everything as far as my dive.
Yeah.
And you were able to download your profile, so you'd see the squiggly stuff too. And it would keep track of my surface interval times, everything. It was really, and it was a cool looking watch. And so that was my first. My father bought it for me. That was when I first started, and that was very exciting for me. I have 3 computers. 2 are identical. They just changed the name of one of them. It's not a real big deal. But the expensive one that I had, I really didn't like it. I didn't really like Air Integrated, because there were times that would lock you out. If you didn't do what the computer really liked, it would kind of lock me. So I didn't really like that one. And there were also too many moving parts. I don't mean moving parts per se, but I mean it had a swivel, which means if it had a swivel, it had it had 2 O-rings. It had a quick disconnect, so it means another O-ring. And I didn't really like that. It's too many moving parts, too many potential for failures. The ones that I've always really liked are really simple computers that aren't that expensive. They're typically in the range of $150 to $300. That's my typical one, and I've always put them on a bungee, double bungee wrist mount. It's always done that way. I'll never forget the one time one of my instructors had his really very expensive wrist mounted computer, and he went down, and his obviously when we were at depth, your wetsuit shrinks, so now it was wobbling all around. And he fell off. And we found it, of course, like 2 seconds later.
Oh,
but
good.
I remember that little lesson of the way bungees work. They will always get tighter and tighter, so they're always trying to get tighter. So I've always just gone with an inexpensive forearm one or 2 of them, and just in case one craps out.
Okay, now talking about dive computers, we have the economical end, and we have the more elaborate, more luxury, top of the line computers. So the computers that you guys use, do you have to use your dive tables to plan your dive, or can you plan your dive on your computer? How does that work? Greg, we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah. So all the computers, you could technically plan a portion of your dive,
Okay.
because really all it's basically saying is when you're scrolling through on the ones I have, you're just scrolling through and it will say max bottom time for each depth. So obviously, well, in most cases, when you're doing a dive, you've got a chart, the depth that you're going to be diving in. Sometimes you can be surprised based on tide, of course, and whatever, but or just if a storm comes through, it could change it by a few feet.
How about you, Brian?
yeah, like Greg was saying, you can scroll through but for the most part, I'll look at a table.
Okay.
It's just quicker.
Okay.
You look at whether it be, you know, an RGBM table or the regular NAUI table that I've used, really any table. I mean, they're all going to be similar within a couple feet and a couple of minutes. You know, so you look at it and go, okay, I've got, you know, 15 minutes at this depth, which will give you a basic idea of how long your dive will be. You know, am I going to be doing a 20, 30-minute dive, or am I looking at doing a 45-minute to an hour-long dive? Well, how deep are we going?
Now,
And so,
I guess the reason I asked that is because I guess I wanted to roundabout prove a point. Tables are always going to be in our lives as far as diving, or should be in our lives as far as diving. You can plan the dive and execute the dive based on your tables, or you can, like you guys said, take a quick look and go, okay, I can go here for here. That's what I'll plan on. And then your computer actually tracks the dive so it's more precise. It gives you a more accurate bottom time, average depth. Brian, in your case, gas consumption.
mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
I would say that was one of the things, being in the tech class that I'm in, we had to look at that. So I actually pulled up some of my dives, and on the dives, it was tracking my depth and all that. I could see the depth and water temperature, and then it was actually giving me surface air consumption rates at each point. So I could get a rate for the whole dive, what my average was for the whole dive, but then at different points along it, where I knew what I was doing during those times, I could see, oh, okay, here I was resting. We were sitting on a platform or whatever. Or here I was actually pulling somebody, you know, I was dragging somebody along underwater. So it wasn't just me I was trying to swim with, but I was helping somebody else along. And I could see what my rate was there. So I can see, you know, a good working rate as opposed to a resting rate. So when you start now planning, okay, well, will that 80 cubic foot cylinder last me? Maybe, maybe not, you know, based on what your breathing rates are. And it was a neat little thing that I didn't even realize my computer did for me until last week. that it had that math was all in there for me. So I didn't have to sit down and figure it out. It gave it to me.
Very cool. So question, and coming from a recreational standpoint and then transitioning into technical, as a recreational diver, I had my Sunto Cobra, and that's what I dove. Going into technical diving made me look back and find things that I did wrong. So one thing that I did wrong is I only had one computer. I only had one thing to tell me what was going on with my dive. So going into my technical learning, if that computer failed, I didn't know how fast I was ascending. I didn't know how long I had been on the bottom. So I didn't know a lot of the information that you really need to know, especially your ascent rate. When equipment fails, you end the dive and you go up, but you got to know how fast you're going up. So what I started doing is, no matter what I dive or where I'm diving or how I'm diving, I have either two computers or a computer and my tables written out on my arm.
Yeah.
So just, what do you guys do?
Same.
Okay.
Same.
Okay. I saw some guys, like if they have an air integrated computer,
mm-hmm.
where their SPG would be, they would have their tables zip tied right there.
Yeah.
Well, either way.
I always had, like, my pressure gauge was always sitting right here, right at my D-ring.
Yep.
It was clipped to my D-ring so I could just look down and see it. So I was always gauging that, and that was just a common thing. But the way I dive, I always had them on. I always had one or two of them. Either one was in a pocket, or one was as a backup, and always one on a wrist, and always a compass on the other. It was very, very, it was always the same. As far as wet notes, we always had wet notes, so we would put our dive plan or profile. If we didn't have our wet notes, we had a modified dive slate, which is a little bit smaller than your normal typical dive slates. It's carrying a dive table is kind of big, so we'd have a modified dive slate that was a little bit smaller that you can shove in a pocket and use it that way.
How about you, Brian?
So diving recreationally, I've never been terribly paranoid about something failing. I have had computers fail on dives. Probably my, 4 computers ago, I've gone through a couple. But one of the things that we teach is when it fails, dives over immediately.
Yep.
And your ascent rate, as long as all of your bubbles are going above you, they're going faster than you're going slower than 30 feet per minute, which is the approved descent rate. So when you stop and okay, we're going up. So as long as all my bubbles are going faster than me, I know I'm going slow enough. And that's how I've done previously. Now going into the tech world, where you can't come to the surface, you don't have that option. So you have to have backups. You have to have something that, if one fails, you've got a backup that will now get you to the surface safely. But on the recreational side of things, that's one of the things that we really teach with our students, is that in the event of a failure, how do you get yourself out of the water safely when your equipment, you can't rely on the electronics. The electronics are gone.
By the way, I want to interject. I have never had a piece of equipment fail. I had to make sure of that. My rebreather, my cell wasn't reading one time, and that was before I ever jumped into the water. So I had to take my rig apart, find out what was wrong. It was a loose connection that I screwed up. I corrected it, put my unit back together, tested it, but I have never had a computer fail on a dive. So
I've had one.
Okay.
I was right about 50 feet, and I looked at it, and while I was looking at it, I watched it flood. And I'm like, you've got to be in it. Blip, 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 plunk. Like,
wait a minute, how'd that go?
Blip, 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 plunk. It let out like 2 or 3 little bubbles, and then it went blank.
Okay.
And come to find out, I messed up when I changed the battery on it. The O-ring wasn't as seated properly. It didn't fail on its own accord. It was my fault. But as soon as you fill it with salt water, well, it doesn't really matter anymore.
And that's kind of what I want to point out to people. I don't want to scare people into not diving. If something fails or something goes wrong, it's not usually the equipment that fails or goes wrong. It's generally an error on a human part, whether it be servicing your own gear, and you don't do it every day, so you mess something up. That's a big reason why we bring gear to shops. Let a professional do it, and he does it every day, keeps track of it, and you're pretty comfortable it's done right and it'll last.
He's also doing it in a clean environment, not sitting on the tailgate of a truck where you've got beach sand everywhere. Yeah.
How about you, Greg? Any failed computers?
My Uatech, I think it's called a SmartCom air integrated one.
Oh, I thought that was just a bottom timer. Okay.
No, I think they made it was SmartCom, whichever. It was really expensive. And I remember I had a really good deal on it because at the time, Scuba Pro must have owned them or they were in parts. I don't remember the whole thing. And the deal was it was like half a half kind of thing. So I paid like $222 for this thing.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and but that thing, it failed on me only because the O-ring was serviced, but it wasn't serviced with the proper size O-ring and the proper tool.
Gotcha.
So you needed a special tool for that quick disconnect. And once that thing failed, it just, it wasn't good.
Oh, by the way, I just bought all my specialty tools to rebuild my rebreather.
Smart.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've never really, other than that, I don't think I have had any other really failures for computers. I've had gear failures.
Like
but,
what? I mean,
well, a prime example in the beginning when I started diving,
yeah.
My fin strap broke.
Okay.
And I don't know why it broke. It was where it clipped in, But after that, I said, okay, no more. That's never going to happen again. And here's why it's never going to happen again. And I use springs. So
Okay.
that I got rid of that. I had a pressure gauge.
Yeah.
And that's pretty common, unfortunately. Pressure gauge, I told you, sitting on my left D-ring, and it's looking right down at, or I'm looking right down at it. But over time, if you don't service if you dive a lot and you don't service them a lot,
yeah,
that O-ring, and it's like a penny, I think, it costs nothing for that little tiny O-ring.
But it causes you a big load of problems.
Big load of problems.
Yep.
I think I had other than that, I might have had a mask failure, a strap one snap on something.
Okay, but we've never collectively, we've never had anything fail that put our lives in jeopardy.
I did have, I'll tell you, no, that's true. But I will tell you an interesting story.
Here I am telling people it's safe. Hey, wait a minute, I gotta. Yeah, no.
No. But it's an interesting one. My inflator.
Yep.
Was put on at a shop.
Yep.
And for some odd reason, it just wasn't. Either they didn't have the proper tool, or they got distracted, and the zip tie wasn't really tight enough. And I don't know if you remember during my open water. Some of my open water classes, what I would do is I would show people these two little zip ties that hold, and I would say, make sure they're tight, because sometimes they're not overly tight. And some people yank on that, and they yank on it, you can get water in your, in your PC, but it's an easy fix. I mean, it's a super easy fix.
Okay. So going back to dive tables and computers.
Never had a plastic table fail.
Well, that's just it.
Yeah.
The tables don't fail. They're safer to dive than a computer. I'm not telling people, or I'm not telling anyone not to buy a computer or don't dive a computer. That's all I dive. I just want people to understand that electronics can fail. They can. Batteries, compartments can flood. Things can leak, whatever. It just decided that, hey, I'm 10 years old and I'm going to stop working. Whatever. Tables can't fail. Tables don't try to extend your bottom time as computers do. You dive, you plan your dive, and you dive your plan, how we always say. So what do you guys feel? I guess, what do you guys feel as far as, what do you need out of a computer? What should someone look for? They want to buy a computer. They want to dive a computer. They don't want to use tables. I get it. They don't want to use tables. They want to buy a computer and dive a computer. What do you guys think they should be looking for? We're gonna go back and forth. Greg, you name one thing. Brian, you name one thing. We'll go back and forth like that. So, Greg, go ahead. What are they looking for?
Something that lights up when you just touch it, so you can see at night.
Okay. Illumination. Brian, go ahead.
Being able to see it in the bright sunlight.
Yes.
I have a computer we brought to the Bahamas. We get splash in, we drop down 30 feet. Penny goes to look at her wrist, and then looks at me and goes like this. I look at it, I tap it. I'm like, okay. Fortunately, it was a shipwreck that we were going to see, so we stuck our heads inside where we could get some shade, and then I could read it. Her computer, it was working, it was doing its thing, but in the bright sun, and I couldn't believe how bright it was at 30 feet on this dive. Could not read her computer.
Okay.
We had to keep doing this in order to see what it was saying.
Okay. One
So-
requirement from me and all the computers that I have and I use is ease of touch, ease to control. So the buttons, if I'm wearing heavy gloves, I can still do all my buttons and all my switching. So that's one thing for me is I guess ease of usability or ease of, I don't want to say dexterity, but ease to control.
Okay. I like mine super simple. When I look at it, I know exactly my depth, my max bottom time, really, really super simple to look at and big and that's what I like.
Yep.
I had a computer that had way too many things and pictures that were always there and things that were always blinking. Wasn't good.
You would hate every computer I own.
Probably.
Brian,
I would say with the one that I'm currently diving, I like how it's customizable.
okay.
So if I'm going to do this for a set of dives, I can plug it into my computer and I can change what the screens are and what order they come up in. It only has 3 buttons on it, so for ease of cycling through things, very simple. But then I can log into it and change what it's showing me as its default screen and what each button does and what each button shows me next.
Okay.
Then we're going to do something a little more complex where I need more info. I can set that. So it's the ability to customize it is very nice. A neat feature it has is it's all Bluetooth. So at the end of the dive, I turn my phone on, turn on my tablet, and I can download the dive through Bluetooth, and I can look at the whole thing. While I'm still even geared up, I don't need to have a laptop to log the dive.
Okay. One thing that just because of what I've gotten into, more or less important to me is multiple gases. I can plug in. So even if let's get out of technical, even if you're a recreational diver and one dive you're diving air, one dive you're diving 32 nitrox, one dive you're diving 36 nitrox. So being able to set up my computers with standard gases just so I can say, Ben, I'm diving this gas.
Yeah.
That's important to me.
Yep.
So next, Greg, go ahead.
Ruggedness.
Man,
I'll tell you, I had one that was so delicate. I don't know if I bumped it on the boat or whatever I did. It crapped out. So something that's rugged.
okay.
I know that sounds kind of weird, but I've always used the hockey puck style ones that come out of the original, their original wristband, and put them into one that's specially made for, where you can put the bungee attached to it. So it's a little bit better.
Yep.
But it had to be rugged.
Okay. What about you, Brian?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned rugged, and that's why my first computer, I think I set a tank on it. It didn't survive that at all. I think it's been kind of mentioned, but easy to read.
Okay.
It needs to be something where you can glance at it and get the info you're looking for. Your depth, your time. Are you at your no decompression limits or not? Not something that's flashing and beeping and making all. I hate sounds. I hate when the computers start beeping and they won't shut up. Um, one of my dive buddies knows this, and if he gets a chance to steal my computer from me, he'll turn every alarm on the thing has. So from the second you hit the water, it starts beeping. And of course, at 10 feet underwater, you can't shut any of that stuff off. You got to be on land in order to turn off the alarms. But that ease of use, that you look at it, it's simple, and it's not throwing so much junk at you that now you miss the important things. A very clean screen.
It's funny you say that. It's funny you say it, just a quick glance. Some comedian once said, I hate when my alarm clock is set wrong or when it's daylight savings time, where I have to wake up, look at the clock, and do quick math in my head. What is the real time? Well, it's the same thing. I don't want to have to look at my computer and go, all right, if I add this, I can get this. And I don't want to do that. I just want it to be there and be right.
Mm-hmm.
So just to recap on dive tables versus dive computers, we're all in agreement, one, that dive tables or dive computers are based off of the theories that went into creating dive tables, correct? Okay. Dive tables are the safest way to dive. Not always the easiest to use. Some people do have trouble with the different calculations and following a dive table. So the RGBM came out, and RGBM is very, this is what I'm doing dive 1, this is what I'm doing dive 2, this is what I'm doing dive 3. So they kind of made it really simple to use a dive table. With that being said, computers, which I want to say at least 85% of the dive community is using dive computers. I've never had a computer fail. I've had a computer act funky on the surface. I had to send it back. They fixed it free of charge, sent it back to me. So I've never had a piece of equipment fail underwater. So they're pretty reliable, right? Dive computers, it's not like every other day we're having a problem with our dive computers. Dive computers are pretty reliable. They can range from very economical, $100, $200, up to $1,600. And I believe even above that. But depending on what you want the computer to do, depending on what's important to you, we're all looking for a computer that's easy to read. We're all looking for a computer that's rugged. We're all looking for a computer, I would say one thing I missed, easy to maintain. So easy to clean, easy to wash, easy to rinse, easy to change batteries. I like that my computers run on AA batteries that I can change after every dive if I want to. What else? I mean, we're kind of wrapping up. We're coming to the end. So, did I miss anything, guys?
No, I think that's about it.
Don't everyone talk at once.
Yeah, you got it.
Yeah, you need to understand tables. You need to understand why you need to know about tables. But especially like for your recreational diver that's going to go out, they're going to do a shore dive for a half hour, 40 minutes. Maybe they're going to the Caribbean and they're going to do a 2-tank boat dive type deal. They may not have a whole lot of planning going into that dive because there's a dive master that's leading it and he's already done the planning. So they're going to require, in most cases, they're going to require you dive a computer just so that you stay safe. But having the knowledge of where all that came from. It's all based on the tables. It came from the tables. Hopefully you can understand whether it be doesn't really matter what set of tables. If somebody puts a set of tables in front of you with a couple of minutes of reading, you should be able to understand it and know, oh, this is this, this is this, and work your way through it, whether it be, a complex set or something simple like the RGBMs. All your instructions for them are there.
Okay, so we do all teach
You know, and if you know where it came from and what it's doing.
tables. We do all teach tables during our courses.
Yep.
And we also introduce people to computers. Brian, you said the students are required to dive a computer when they're with you?
Yep.
Okay, so we all, I guess what I'm getting at is we're all doing pretty much the same thing. We're all pretty much uniform when it comes to the information that we're giving students. You're going to be taught how to read tables, how to plan a dive off of tables, how to I just lost my train of thought. How to read tables, how to plan a dive off of tables, but then how to take that plan and apply it to your computer and what to expect.
Right.
Okay.
I have one
Go ahead.
last kind of funny little thing. You meant, Brian, you mentioned that some places when you go away require you to have a computer with you. Well,
Yep.
it's so true. I'll expand on that one because when you're in we went to Canada for diving. It's all boat diving, obviously, or most of it's boat diving. They all require computers. That was always a given up there. But one of the things that I noticed that there were some folks with new computers that had no idea how to even turn them on or understand what they were looking at. They would just go out and buy them the day before.
Okay, so let pause right there for 1 second, Greg. So Greg, you bring up a great point, and this is for the students, for the divers. If you are buying a new computer, seek some kind of an instruction on how to use your computer, how to program your computer. You can grab the dive shop that sold you the computer, and they will generally be knowledgeable in the product that they're selling, and they'll be able to go over it with you on how to use it. If not, get your instructor that you're comfortable with, that you like dealing with, and they'll take the time most of the time. Most of the time, they'll take the time. You know what? You're showing interest in a sport that an instructor really loves, or let's face it, we wouldn't be doing this. So to pass knowledge on to a student, most instructors are all for it.
Yeah.
Yep.
So bottom line, you buy a new computer, seek some kind of instruction on how to use that computer, and then play with it. Get used to it. Get comfortable with it. Know the different screens. Play with the buttons. See what they do. So we all can stay safe, right?
Right on.
Anyone got anything else? No? Good talk. I really enjoy the conversations. So if there is nothing else, I'm gonna now end the recording.